the Olmec, the Mayan, the Inca, the Aztec, Mixtec, the involvement of Africans in this part of the world. Africans were already in America long before the Olmec culture came. But when you're looking at the Olmec culture, the Olmeca heads, you see that there was a presence here in America in the Gulf of Mexico that are going to build the pyramids in this particular Gulf of Mexico area, including Tres Zapotes, San Lorenzo, and other areas. We have never been exposed to this information before. We have never been exposed to an idea that there's evidence of Ramses III, a pharaoh or a Nesut Beti of the 19th dynasty. There's evidence of him on the Mississippi River. There's evidence of Egypt in America that goes back many millennia. So you've got to lay down a foundations as to how Africans would have had the wherewithal to be able to find themselves in this part of the world. And what we find is that there are 3 ocean currents that leave the coast of West Africa and find themselves on or coming to the American continent or the American hemisphere. From Africa to the continent and back to Africa. There's one somewhat in the middle, and there's one in West Africa, and there's one that would be somewhere near the southern part of Africa, known as the Benguela Current. These belts, almost like moving roads. They could come just by being on the boat with the wind, just putting your sail in a way that the boat could come to this part of the world. So we know that the Kemites, the Egyptians, the Sudanese, had this power. We know that they had the boats that would be able to make a trip this way, along with the fact that they had different types of ways in which to power it, whether it was through the wind or whether it was through oars. They knew how to travel the waters that would be the ocean currents and the wind systems, and they knew the seasons to know when the winds would be at their best, so they knew when to travel. Not only is it possible, but they did it, and you can see it in the civilization of the Olmec, of the Maya, of the pyramids. There are over 100 pyramids along the Mississippi River.
This is our land. We're in Northwest Africa, standing right now what we call North America. And it's a known fact that it's that. But what happens if I taught you in my school system for 12 years, and then 4 more years I'm educating you in my college, you only going to repeat directly what I just said to you. You see what I'm saying? Until someone steps up and say, no, this is who we are. There's a book. Matter of fact, it's a Webster's Dictionary, 1937, 1939. Webster's Dictionary talks about the definition of America. And it says it is the aboriginal or copper-colored natives found on the American continent by the European. And it says it is the aboriginal or copper-colored natives found on the American continent by the European.
The history of history books. The history books are not true. It's a lie. That's right. The history books are lying. You need to know that. You must know that.
What science has now found, although this is suppressed for the most part, this is not taught in your public schools, although it will be. The history that the children are learning today is not going to be history that's going to be taught in the next 25 years. It's going to be radically different. We now know for a fact that long before Columbus, there were 4 major migrations of blacks to the Americas, different parts of the Americas. And it is now known that the West African Kingdom of Mali had huge fleets of merchant vessels, and that these kings, these black kings of West Africa, began sailing across the Atlantic to Mexico as early as 900 AD, about 200 years before Christ, up until right at about the time of Christ. In other words, about 2,000 years ago. There now appears that there were wealthy West African and North African blacks and came, if you can believe this or not, but there's solid proof for it now, to southern Illinois. Now I'll explain how that happened. In 1982, our time, there was a guy who was going along southern Illinois. He was a cave hunter. And he was, I don't know if you're familiar with southern Illinois at all, on the Ohio River. It's just honeycombed with caves, thousands of caves. They have not all been explored by any means. And he was involved in sports for hunting in caves. It's done all the time. It's rough work. Sometimes these caves are very narrow. He went into, to make a long story short, he went into this cave that no one had ever seen before. And he squeezed through a very narrow entrance, and all of a sudden it turned out into an enormous room. And in this room, he found great sarcophagi, or coffins, coffin lids, made out of stone. The walls are engraved with all kinds of stories, picture stories of men and women in old costumes from the ancient world. And then on the floor, he found stacks of thousands upon thousands of these black rocks that were beautifully engraved with the profiles of people, not Indians, but hundreds are of black people, all in profile. They are made on a type of rock that is found really mostly only in southern Illinois in caves. This rock is like a clay. You pull it out of the ground, and you have like a stylus or a pen, and you can draw on it real fast. You can draw profiles and letters, and then as it dries, it turns into a hard rock. And these rocks are piled up on the floor of this cave. Now, this man's name is Russell Burroughs. He's not an archaeologist. He's just a spelunker. He's a cave enthusiast. He brought these out over time. They're very difficult to bring out because the cave entrance is so narrow. And he's brought out now almost 10,000 of these magnificent tablets. They're very crude looking as rocks are concerned, but the drawings are beautiful. And they show the profiles of black people, some with scarification, which is West African, mostly with not that, some with specifically West African robes, which are still used today. Some of them will show like a black man with a kind of a sailor's cap, and in the background will show like a ship or a fish. It seems as though they're portraying a captain or a sailor of some kind. 1861, a farmer plowing his field came across a very strange domed rock, a black rock, and he couldn't dig it out. The more he dug down, the bigger this rock got, until he dug the entire thing away. It took him weeks to dig it away. And it turned out that he unearthed a 9-foot-high statue of a head, beautifully done, of an African, not an Indian at all the portrayed features of a West African man. This is one of the great Olmec heads, and this is part of this helmet, this marvelous helmet, which nobody could understand. There's no other parallel for this helmet found anywhere in the world except West Africa.
South American archaeologists are finding unusual human remains. The skulls aren't European, but they aren't American Indian either. The skulls aren't European, but they aren't American Indian either. They belong to none of the prehistoric races known to have set foot in the New World. These skulls are as old as the Ice Age. So who were these first people to discover the Americas? And what became of them? Did they all disappear? Or did some of them survive? Archaeologists there have recently unearthed human remains. Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil 9,000 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He's been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to. He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
9-1.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we started running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing these people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That to me is a Negroid face that has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being Mongoloid.
Her reconstruction is confirmed by measurements Walter Nevis has taken of all his skulls.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians.
How do you make that connection between the Kemetic people, the Moors, and the Hebrew?
It's like a Chinese talking about what's the difference between Chinese and light-skinned yellow people and dark-skinned yellow people. The fact of it is no such thing as light-skinned yellow people and dark-skinned yellow people. They're Chinese or Manchurian. How about that? And this goes the same thing with our people identifying their belief systems as their bloodline identity, which is an indication that they don't even know fundamental civilization. As a matter of fact, even in our culture, Tetragrammaton actually deals with the four gates and the four elements. And yet Tetragrammaton is presented to people who don't understand it as the ineffable word or four-letter word. You know, YHWH, and then those who don't understand the science just say Yahweh, you know, and then those who don't understand that say Jehovah. And yet those same people will turn around and condemn cosmology, which is actually the foundation of all religions on the planet. And so what you find is people sitting around debating their beliefs that have nothing to do with the science of life. And so the masses today have what you call club belief systems. And if you really pay attention to many of our people, and it's really unfortunate, and I don't condemn them, I'm just observing. And watch us, being you're a journalist in many ways. And for the different people that you deal with around this country, and some, you know, from other nation states that may travel through, you'll find that one of the greatest damaging aspects of our fallen culture here in North America with the Asiatics, people of Asiatic African birth, is that they have fallen into the trickster psychology of European divisionism, and they identify themselves by their belief systems, not by their blood. As a matter of fact, they don't recognize nationhood nor bloodline, which of course is why, if you'll pay attention to us, our people hide behind their so-called beliefs for this imitation power that none of us possess. The power that we actually need in our unity. The power that we actually lost for having become divided with our, banal belief systems, most of which, when traced back, have no foundation rooted in the original Zoroaster culture or the original principles of Islam and Yahudi, or what you call the philosophies, which are actually Gnostic and cosmological philosophies, the metaphysical microcosm, macrocosm elements of the earth study, and the ephemeritis by which we guide government.
How do you make that connection between the Kemetic people, the Moors, and the Hebrew?
It's like a Chinese talking about what's the difference between Chinese and light-skinned yellow people and dark-skinned yellow people. The fact of it is no such thing as light-skinned yellow people and dark-skinned yellow people. They're Chinese or Manchurian. How about that? And this goes the same thing with our people identifying their belief systems as their bloodline identity, which is an indication that they don't even know fundamental civilization.
Dane Calloway.
We are the fucking Indians.